Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. I'm so excited to do this today. I have to admit that when we aired our episode a couple of weeks ago with Dawn Fitch, I was inundated with emails and comments from people who had MS or knew people who had MS, and they wanted to talk more about it. Dawn Fitch was in episode 65. She's the founder and CEO of Pooka skincare products, and her journey was inspired by several vague symptoms that she just wasn't feeling well. It took about 4 more years for her to be diagnosed with MS or multiple sclerosis. And typically, I wouldn't do another podcast on such a similar topic so close together, but I had the great opportunity to meet today's 2 guests who reached out in response to that. And so I was motivated to dedicate another time slot to it. Now, our guests are Katie and Reese. Katie, wave, Katie.
Hi.
Katie was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2016 at the age of 29. After overcoming the initial shock of her diagnosis, she became committed to living an overall healthier lifestyle, which we hear from many patients, including Dawn Fitch said the same thing. In the years since, she's focused on changing her diet and improving and maintaining a high level of fitness. And by high level, I mean competing in half marathons and bike races. Now, because of the unpredictability of her MS, Katie understands the importance of having resources to help her manage. She supports GatherMS, which is a website that connects people with MS and their support partners to resources and services that may be able to help. Now, Reese, say hi, Reese.
Hi.
Reese was diagnosed with MS in 2015 at the age of 22. At the time, she had just graduated from college and was looking forward to a bright and busy future. She was a passionate long-distance runner, but once diagnosed, she was told she would no longer be able to run marathons. Determined not to let MS stand in her way, she worked with her doctor to safely manage her MS and to continue her love of running. Today, Reese has completed several races and works for a national cancer organization. Her passion for patient advocacy, research, easy for me to say, and resources led to her to become involved with GatherMS. Now, I want our listeners to know that GatherMS is an initiative sponsored by Genentech, but neither Katie nor Reese are paid spokespeople for GatherMS, nor is and Genentech is not a sponsor of this podcast. Although if they want to be, they can certainly reach out, and I would be happy to hear from them. Anyway, welcome to the ladies' room.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. So who wants to go first? Katie, tell me, how did you discover GatherMS?
So I was involved in a support group, and the social worker had reached out asking if anyone had used this website in the past, and I was someone who had. So she set me up then with someone who worked for GatherMS, and she was kind of reaching out to see how I used it, if I had any recommendations for it. That was about a year and a half ago, and so I've kind of since been involved, but I actually started using it when about 6 months after I got diagnosed. I just randomly found it really at the time and started using it for a lot of like the local events and seeing if there were any other support groups available locally. I also started using it for like the restaurants to see if there were any delivery services at the time.
That's a great use. And I'll tell you, in my area, we don't have a lot of restaurants with delivery services, but I'm thrilled that our grocery store now delivers groceries. So welcome to the 21st century. Reese, how did you find GatherMS?
I found GatherMS through an event I attended with the Rocky Mountain Multiple Sclerosis Center. I'm on their youth professional network, and we were hosting an event that centered around art, and I heard a presentation from a woman that works closely with GatherMS, and we actually connected initially on our love for running. So I went up and talked to her about the running aspect. And then as a side note, she introduced me to GatherMS and showed me the amazing resources that it does collect and puts online for patients with MS that are looking for support, or resources like Katie said in their neighborhood or local areas.
So Katie, tell us how you came to be diagnosed with MS. What were your initial symptoms?
So my initial symptoms actually occurred like a year and a half before I got diagnosed. I had had some double vision. Everything that I had over that year, though, had kind of came and went. So it was very inconsistent, and nothing occurred simultaneously with another symptom. And then what really prompted me to know something was wrong was when I had experienced numbness down one of my legs. And then that was when I went ahead and seen a doctor for it. I sought medical attention literally like the day of, because I was so worried about it. And then within a couple of months after it being monitored, I started experiencing right-sided weakness. So I went back to that doctor, and fortunately enough, he was able to get me into an MRI and into a neurologist within that week.
Oh,
and I was diagnosed. I was very fortunate. I was diagnosed right away after that.
Right, because we know the average patient, it takes about 3 or 4 years to get diagnosed.
Right.
And
that's one thing I felt very fortunate about, because I don't really consider me, I know that I had probably had it for that year and a half prior to, because of the symptoms I was experiencing. But I was very fortunate, because when I actually knew something was wrong, to get into my doctor right away, and he was able to diagnose me within days. So I still feel very fortunate for that.
So this was your primary care physician who you saw first?
This was actually a physician. So I'm a physical therapist. So this was a physician that I worked with.
Okay.
And so I just scheduled an appointment with him and told him I knew something was wrong. And he's the first person, I guess, who prompted the thought that it might be multiple sclerosis.
And what kind of a doctor is he?
Orthopedic, sports and orthopedic.
Okay, so not the typical doctor that we first see for MS symptoms. But the reason I ask is one of the most common questions I get from people about most health conditions is, what type of a doctor do I see first? And I always recommend that you see your primary care physician, but you bring up a really important exception to that rule, and that is get in to see the doctor who can see you first.
Right, and that's really what it was. Like I said, I worked in the same office with these physicians, so I was kind of able to just run over there quickly and schedule an appointment. But that was what was most important, was just that I got in to see a doctor right away. Mm-hmm. At the time, I wasn't thinking multiple sclerosis, so.
Right. And just out of curiosity, why did you not see a doctor when you had the double vision?
It literally lasted for maybe 15 seconds, 30 seconds in the morning, and then it would go away. I think it only lasted for a month. And when I say that, I mean within a month's time, I might have experienced it 10 or 15 times. And it lasted anywhere from 30 seconds to through my shower, for instance, which might be 15 minutes, and it went away. That might have only occurred a couple of the days that I had experienced it at all. And then I never had it again. Those episodes maybe lasted for 1 month, and I never had it again.
All right, so Reese, tell us about your early experiences with your initial MS symptoms. What did you first experience?
So I first started experiencing symptoms around the age of 22, right before college graduation, and that was more of a numbness on my right side of the body. And so I went into my PCP, my primary care physician, pretty quickly within the month, and then I had an appointment with my neurologist, who then diagnosed me within 2 hours of my MRI with MS. But the funny thing about my story is I had actually been experiencing MS symptoms back till 2006. But for 9 years, I had never known that the symptoms I had been experiencing had anything to do with multiple sclerosis. I just chalked them up to being a teenager or having some sort of strange symptom that, was just another side effect of growing or going through puberty or being, a young teenager into young adulthood. And then I later found out that what it was is called layer mitts, and it's where when you bend your neck or move your neck in a certain way, you experience electrical signals throughout your torso, or some people experience it throughout their legs. But those were the first symptoms that were present for me at the get-go.
And what did that feel like? Did it feel like when you hit your funny bone, or was it something more like a shock?
Yeah, and it's a very hard feeling to describe. It doesn't feel painful like a shock. It's more like a funny bone sensation, but it's unlike anything I've probably ever felt elsewhere. It's almost a combination of like butterflies and, I guess how you put it, a funny bone sensation. But once I actually started experiencing the numbness, and as an adult realized that was probably not normal, like Katie, I was diagnosed pretty quickly, and then was put on a treatment plan pretty quickly. So I was able to get going on my my care after that.
So it sounds like you were both diagnosed immediately after the MRI results. Did either one of you have to have a spinal tap as well?
I did not.
No.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And when you were a teenager, Reese, and you had these feelings, these sort of neurologic sensations, did you tell your parents? Did you tell your doctor then, or you just kind of brushed it off?
I don't have any recollection of telling anyone. I just thought it was normal, I guess, or I thought maybe it was nothing to be concerned about. So I don't believe I ever mentioned it to anyone, maybe aside from my mom once or twice when it initially started, but it wasn't concerning to me at the time.
And do either one of you have anyone in your family with MS?
No.
I do.
Okay. So how many relatives do you have with MS?
I had two great aunts that were diagnosed with MS in their 20s. They've both since passed away, but they experienced MS in a time when treatment and the knowledge around it was different. So I think I have a different experience than they probably ever did.
Right. And there's different types of MS. Have either one of you been told which specific type you have?
Yeah, I was told I have relapsing remitting, which I think is common, I guess, for other people our age. But that's what I was told.
Okay. And relapsing remitting means it can come and go.
Yeah, so they think that, for me anyway, that I might have had one relapse earlier on when I first started experiencing some of the double vision and some of those other symptoms that I was having. But then they think that my second relapse was actually when I got diagnosed, and those were the more prominent symptoms. So, fortunately enough, my body kind of recovered pretty much wholly from that. But that's what relapsing remitting is. You kind of start at one level, and if you relapse, you may drop down a little bit, but then the idea is that your body hopefully recovers. You just may not recover at a baseline.
And Reese, have you been told what specific type you have?
Yes, I also have relapsing remitting. So I've had, I want to say the symptom that prompted me to go into the physician from the start was a relapse, and then I also had a case of optic neuritis where for about 5 months, the vision in my left eye was very blurry, and it took on a gray scale tone. And that's when you have inflammation of the optic nerve. But it looks different in everyone. But that was probably the most aggressive relapse I've had. But since then, fortunately, everything has been very minor and more of the day-to-day, occasional funny tingles and the like.
All right, so I want to hear about your mutual love for running. And it occurs to me, for some reason, we've had a lot of marathon runners on this program and a lot of runners. We've had Joetta Clark-Diggs, who, of course, is a 4-time Olympic runner. We've had a woman who lost one of her legs due to tragic complications of surgery and became a serious runner after that, so training for the Paralympics. We had a woman, Barbara Gufferman, who started running marathons when she was 50 and had not been a runner before that. And we've had lots of other recreational runners. But tell us what your running routine is now and how you got to this place.
Yeah, so I happened to stumble into running right before I was diagnosed, which now looking back is pretty fortunate that I took it up before being diagnosed with MS. I had a group of friends that were avid runners, and so I decided, why not? I'm going to give this a try. And after you get over that initial 4 mile hump, you start to like running. At least
And this was during college or
yes.
after college?
This was about a year before I was diagnosed, while I was in college still. And next thing I knew, I was signing up for half marathons. I completed my first marathon last May. May of 2017. And I have a few more half marathons next year. So it was kind of serendipitous, and it was good timing that I discovered running. But now I truly enjoy it, and I look for that race high and that finish line high as much as I can.
Had you been in any competitive sports before?
I did play competitive sports in high school, but I absolutely
Which ones?
I played softball for the most part, and then I did basketball for a little while. But I absolutely hated running in high school.
I hated running. I was actually a high school swimmer and a tennis player, and my nickname in tennis was Lazy Legs because I hated running, and I still do. So Katie, how did you discover running?
So I was kind of more like some of the others that you described. I didn't really get into it much until after I was diagnosed. And that was because I had like a personal goal of running a half marathon. And I ran track and played soccer in high school, but the running didn't follow through. I didn't love running more than just a mile or two. But when I got diagnosed, I kind of had been saying before that I always wanted to do a half marathon, just a personal goal. And I'll admit that kind of lit the torch a little bit to live a little bit more intently to get some of those goals accomplished. So I signed up. I had always done 5Ks, I should say, and did fine with those. But that first one was kind of a struggle after I had been diagnosed. So I got into the short distances, that was fine. The half marathon, that took a little while to train, but like Reese had said, it's the finish line for me. I don't really love running.
I love finishing.
It's the finishing. There's a thrill about crossing that finish line. There really is. So that's kind of, I guess, what motivates me.
So I'm hearing like a metaphor here for this concept of crossing the finish line and training and dedicating yourself. And it sounds like, Katie, this was almost like you wanted to do this to spite your diagnosis.
I would probably say that that's true. Yes. I think I got all of that stuff kind of taken care of. I should say I ran that half marathon, or the first 5K after I was diagnosed within a few months. And that was a little bit of a struggle for me because of the weakness I'd been experiencing, but I think it was kind of therapeutic for me to know that I could still do it. And so I decided, why not go ahead and run that half marathon now, you know? And when I did, I found a thrill about crossing that finish line. Like I said, it's motivational. And so I kind of like signing up for those races because it keeps me going. You know, I don't want to run a race and not do very well. So it keeps me training when I run them. Keeps me in shape, I guess.
Now, what have your doctors told each of you about how to modify your training when you're experiencing symptoms, particularly you've both had numbness.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that work with running?
My physician kind of said, you know, as far as anything like that with me specifically, with my symptoms, do what I can, kind of a thing. As far as anything specific, you know, I kind of want people to more refer to their own physician about that. But for me, I know that my doctor just kind of was very nonchalant about it and just said, you know, do what you can. If you do experience symptoms, you know, you might want to rest and take a break, that kind of a thing for me, because I wasn't experiencing anything consistently and nothing that lasted. So any of my symptoms kind of went away.
And Reese, what was your physician's advice?
You know, at first I was, at the very initial diagnosis point, I was told that I should probably scale back my running, and to consider maybe taking it down a notch, which was inconvenient at the time because I had just signed up for another half marathon. So it wasn't the news I wanted to hear, but I kind of use that as an opportunity to advocate for myself because I feel like I know my body best and what it's capable of. So in that case, I came up with a plan with my neurologist to understand how I could continue running, but know the extent of my limits. And so now I know that when I go on a run, if I do need to cut it short or I do need to take it a little slower than normal, that's completely fine. I think it's just all about listening to what your body's telling you. And honestly, I have very rarely had any issues mid-run or after running. I think running is kind of what has kept me, like Katie said, it keeps me going, but physically it's also extremely beneficial in my case. And that's what I truly believe.
That's awesome. Well, I am going to give you a teaser for both of you, as well as for all of our listeners, that we have another guest coming up in a couple of weeks who's obsessed with running. And she's going to tell us about her experience doing the Ironman triathlon in Hawaii, despite having stage 4 lung cancer. So she is quite amazing. And I think that's one of the messages that we hear from all of our guests is whatever your condition is, whatever your diagnosis, your disease, your disorder, you're not defined by that. You know, it's something that you have. It's not something that you are. And this is the thing that, you know, comes with wisdom and experience and maturity and understanding. But how did you react when you first were given the diagnosis, Reese?
It was definitely a very scary diagnosis. I told my family, I told my friends, but inside I think I started thinking all of the thoughts that people are told, or people think when they're told they have an illness or chronic disease. And that was, what is my dating life going to look like? How am I going to maintain a career? Same back to the running and exercise thing. Am I going to be able to keep running and doing yoga and going skiing with my family? There were just a lot of questions. So I think that was the scariest part. But after I was given the diagnosis, I went and got Thai food with my mom, and we figured out a plan. And the next day I woke up feeling like I had a goal going forward and knew what I was going to do.
And without getting too personal, how's your dating life been?
It's up and down.
That's normal.
It's a millennial thing, I think, but there's been ups and downs. It's mostly good though.
And how have your friends reacted to your telling them that you have MS?
They were amazing. They took me out for dinner almost immediately after I told them, and they were there for me. They took me out on my first anniversary with MS, and so I think they forget a lot of times that I have it. But they are always there when I remind them, or if I'm telling them I'm not feeling great or need some extra support.
That's awesome. And Katie, what has your experience been?
Kind of similar to what Reese had said. It was scary. I was actually diagnosed at work, so a lot of my coworkers kind of were right there with me, and I've been there for a few years, so I got the immediate support I think that I needed. But it was very scary and challenging because, again, with kind of similar to what Reese was saying, all of these thoughts kind of go through your head. It's like, how do I handle the now? But then also you're trying to plan for what's going to happen in the future. And MS is so unpredictable that that planning makes it very challenging. So a million thoughts kind of ran through your head at the same time about, okay, how am I going to keep up with work now? How am I going to handle my health now? But also, what does that look like for family planning and my career and even down the road with retirement and things like that? So I probably thought of way too much right away. And I've since learned to maybe take one step at a time. That's helped.
Well, I think that's the professional in you too. It's, physical therapy is all about how do we make a plan and how do we, go forward from here. And how's your dating life been?
Well, I'm married.
Okay. So I guess that's the end of your dating life.
Yeah. So I was married for only a few months before I had experienced my first symptom, and like a year and a half, almost 2 years before I was officially diagnosed. So yeah, I don't have to worry about the dating thing.
So I was actually, to share with you about dating stories, I was married for 100 years before I got divorced and started dating again. And we've done an episode of people dating over 50, which is kind of an interesting experience. But I did go on a date with one guy, and he drank excessively. And this was somebody who I had met on a blind date, but we kind of had a similar, our social circles overlapped. So I mentioned this to a mutual friend, and I didn't hear from him for a while. And then the next time I saw him, he was like really slurring his speech and just drinking a lot. And I decided, okay, I'm a doctor. You know, this is a very nice man. I'm not going out with him again on a date. I'm just going to, you know, do an intervention. And I said something to him about the drinking, and he immediately owned it, which is very unusual for somebody if they have a drinking problem. So I thought this was peculiar. And then he paused and he said, well, I guess since you're a doctor, I can tell you I have Parkinson's disease. And what he was doing was drinking to mask the symptoms of the Parkinson's. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me? And he's like, well, he goes, well, doc, on what date is it appropriate to tell somebody you have Parkinson's disease? And I really had just like a whole different, you know, experience of that. And, you know, and saying like, this has got to be really difficult. And I remember a woman, close friend of mine in college, asking me that question. And this is one of the things that led to my wanting to go into gynecology, was one of my very close friends asked me a question and said, at what number date is it appropriate to tell somebody you have herpes? And I was just floored. In those days, herpes was like the worst thing that could ever happen to somebody. So, you know, just kind of to point out, everybody who's listening is also thinking of their own personal dating experiences right now and sharing uncomfortable things. So I'll switch gears. We'll go back to your support, and you both have great stories of fitness and exercising. But I do know a little bit that you both have said you made lifestyle changes since your diagnosis. So, Katie, what changes have you made since the diagnosis as a result of that?
I call it like self-preservation. I was definitely that person that was always go, go, go and doing a lot for everybody else. So this was definitely a challenge for me to kind of take a few steps back and take time to make sure I'm getting enough sleep, make sure I'm resting, that it's okay to tell people no. I kind of, Reese kind of shed some light on that, with friends and everything. My friends know. But, if you're having a not so good day, trying to say like, I'm not going to make it tonight or something like that, realizing that that's okay for me. I also have really tried changing I was someone who just ate whatever I wanted to. So I've really just tried, scaling back and eating a healthier diet, and exercising, being more into the exercise. I did start, yoga. I know that was something, I had kind of been interested in, and for my own personal reasons, it was something that I was like, well, maybe I should try it for this. Something else I don't love, but I still do it. So I try to make sure that I'm staying up to date on my exercise and my diet, and really overall just living with more intent and being more deliberate about my health. That's great. And Reese, what changes have you made?
I'd say nutrition is probably the biggest one. Like Katie, I used to eat whatever and anything in my sight. It was when I was in college, I had free reign of dorm food, and it was just super easy to eat fried food all the time. And then I guess leading up to my diagnosis, similar with the running story, but once I was diagnosed with MS, I really realized that nutrition is something that could potentially change the course of my disease. And I wasn't gonna, overlook it. So I've started really maintaining my nutrition, and I've kind of done away with anything refined sugar. That's not to say that I don't include it, because Christmas is upon us, and I know I'm probably going to fall off the bandwagon, but for a time, I just try to focus a lot on my eating and my exercise as well. I did do a lot of yoga leading up to my diagnosis, and one of the concerns was that the heat from the room, because it is hot yoga, would exacerbate my symptoms. And so with that being said, I still maintain my yoga regimen. I have no issues so far with the heat. So that's something else that I've really tried to maintain and incorporate into my daily and weekly schedule.
And Katie, how has GatherMS helped you?
So I kind of wish I would have learned about it even sooner before I actually did, because there's so many good resources on it for my area. And what I had initially used it for, I just started Googling stuff really to try to find local resources and things like that. And I stumbled across this website, and I, at the time, was using it to look more for local events, because I started getting into like some of the bike races, some of the MS, awareness types of things. So I started using it for that initially, but this was kind of a little bit after I had probably really needed it. I probably would have used it at the time when I was first diagnosed for a lot of like the delivery food services, and even housekeeping, probably there for a little bit, because I was falling back on some of those things. And so I know that with a lot of like the community and the health and wellness and the events, I have still kind of referred to it. Usually on, like a monthly basis, I kind of go back to it to make sure, see if there's anything new that they have to offer. And I also refer other people to it. I am involved in a support group, and so I try to get in there quite a bit, because I think it's a wonderful website, really, that I think it's in like 16 cities right now. So if it's in your city, I think it's really helpful for a lot of those reasons. But that's mainly what I used it for, is a lot of like the local events and the outreach programs.
And how have you used it, Reese?
So speaking of yoga, I've actually used it to identify yoga classes in the case that the heated room that I'm currently at becomes too much. But there's also apps, so it doesn't necessarily have to be an in-person event. There's yoga apps that show you how to do yoga on your own. So that's something that I've used even when I'm traveling or, not able to make it into my studio. Like Katie was saying, it's in all these cities. There's different events and programs based on the city you're in. And so one of the things I stumbled on a few weeks ago was a ski program for those with MS. And I'm an avid snowboarder.
Of course you are.
So it's nice to know that there's options if there ever comes a day when I might need some more support getting myself up to the mountain or getting down the mountain. So it's a great resource, and I do recommend if you know someone with MS or you are an MS patient, it's something to check out. And I believe they're going to be expanding to more cities, so that's coming as well.
Well, I even noticed in my little town, our local YMCA has a special water fitness class for people with MS. And I actually asked, I've had some spinal injuries. I asked if I could be in it, and they said, no, you have to have a doctor's note that says you have MS. So yeah, there's resources all around. And of course, Katie, as you found, Google is your friend when it comes to this. Dawn Fitch talked about in our podcast interview how she set up, she wasn't able to find a lot of resources where she was, and she set up a Facebook group that now has over 2,000 people. That's a support group for people with MS. And all her other friends who don't have MS, but just want to support people in their lives who do have MS. So I think that's wonderful. I could talk to you guys all day, but we're running out of time. I would be remiss, though, if I didn't ask you the one question that I ask all of our guests, which is my favorite question, which is, what is the most unique, different, interesting, or memorable experience you ever had in the ladies' room, aside from this interview? Katie, you're first.
I was waiting on Reese.
I could tell.
As far as an experience goes in the ladies' room,
or just a memory or something interesting or bizarre that ever happened in a ladies' room. We all have 27 stories like that.
Yeah. So it's kind of more of a funny story, I guess. I was actually in what I thought was the ladies' room in Paris a few years ago, and it was in the winter. And so this is slightly embarrassing, but you're cold. It was right before Christmas, and I went with a girlfriend, and we're touring the city, and we went into a restaurant, and I went to the restroom, and they had heated seats. So I was really excited about that. And I told my girlfriend about it. So she went into the stall next to me. And about that time, my door opened, and it was a gentleman who opened the door on me. And I don't speak French at all, so all I could think to do was scream at the time. But apparently they were like co-ed bathrooms, and we didn't know that. So I left an impression in Paris, but.
And there was no lock on the door?
Well, there was, but okay. You had to like turn it a couple of times, I guess. So I did like the one-click turn thinking that it was locked, and it was not.
We've had lots of guests tell us international restroom stories, and I've shared some of mine over the years. Reese, what was your most unique, interesting, different, or memorable experience in a ladies' room?
I had to think about this one, but I think the most memorable would probably be about a year ago. I went out to a local restaurant and bar with some friends, and we got inside and we got our drinks and we got a table, and next thing you know, it starts pouring rain. It's honestly, it was probably the most rainfall we had received all year. It was torrential downpour. And meanwhile, there's people outside standing in line to get into the bar with no umbrellas, nothing. So about an hour later, not even an hour later, 30 minutes later, I go to the restroom. And at this point, everyone that had been standing in line outside was in the ladies' room in a line of about 15 people waiting for 2 hand dryers because they had become so soaked. And half of these people were on dates. Everyone was done up and looked nice. This was a nice bar on a Saturday night. And they were drenched. I can't even tell you how many females were in line just for the hand dryers. And hair was wet. They were sopping. I honestly don't know how they stayed out. So that stuck out in my head as being something that was truly memorable, because being in Colorado, we don't get a ton of rain. And then rarely do you see 16 females fighting over just a hand dryer.
Actually, I could probably add a question to all of my guests about what's the most unique way that you used one of the hand dryers in the ladies' room, and what object did you have to use it for to dry? But we'll save that for another program. Anyway, I want to thank both of you for a wonderful, wonderful discussion. I know lots of people have benefited, and I know lots of people are going to go to GatherMS as a result of your conversation. I want to wish you both the best of health. Please check in with us from time to time. And let us know when you go from a half marathon to a full marathon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks again for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook @DrDonica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.